Growing up, my dad had been a trucker my whole life. He would often come home and tell these off-the-wall stories that I thought were completely bogus, until I had something happen to me on the road. It was when I was on a multi-state truck haul. I remember it as if it were yesterday because it was my first and my last time going across several states while driving overnight. When I looked at my dash clock, the time was reading just past 10 p.m. It was horrible outside. The rain was battering into the roof of the cab, and I could barely make out the road with my windshield wipers on high. Since I had never driven cross-state before, this area of the route was completely fresh to me. The road was the curviest thing I had ever seen thus far. So far, I hadn't even passed a sign for a rest area or even a truck stop. The road was entirely black except for the reflectors that lined the roadway. I decided right then that if it didn't ease up soon, I was going to get off at the closest stop and wait out the storm. I started to get an eerie feeling, though, when my CB radio went to nothing except static. It was unusual because nothing had ever happened like that before, and I'd driven through some bad spots. I started to fiddle with the dial to try and gain some signal back, but I was stopped in my tracks when I noticed blinking taillights up the way. The car wasn't completely off the road, so if I wanted to get by it, I'd have to pass onto the other lane for a split second. This alone caused me to have to slow down significantly. I eased onto the brake, and I remember feeling a rush of annoyance at the fact that these people just left their car like this. I waited a few seconds to make sure nobody was coming the opposite way, and when I was satisfied that there wasn't, I made my way to the side and passed them. I will never forget what I saw when I did that. As I drove past the car, I noticed a figure in the back seat. Still going slower than normal, I stared harder until I could see that there was a boy in the back. I had a son, and I knew this kid could not have been older than 8. I felt my stomach clench. I felt I had no other option except to stop. I didn't know if this kid was hurt or if he needed help, and I couldn't just leave him out there like that. Walking back to the car, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something in the air felt wrong. Once I got up to his door, I saw that he was all right. He might have looked a little worn, but not injured. I remember trying to speak to him, and he wouldn't say anything except, "They took my mom and dad." Now, I'm not easily freaked out, but that got me. It took me a second to find my words, but before I could say anything, I heard a shrill scream come from the woods beside me. It didn't sound human. It sounded feral. It was startling. The little kid didn't seem too concerned by it. It confused me because he almost seemed excited, relieved. I was not too keen on it and tried to usher him to my truck, but the next words out of his mouth stopped all of that. It sucked any concern for this kid out of my body. He looked me in the face with a dead look on his face and said that the noise was his parents and he couldn't leave. Then he started giggling. The twinkle flipped back in his eyes. Opposite to him, dread loomed with me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something running at the tree line. It wasn't close enough for me to get a good look, but from the sounds I kept hearing, it seemed like it was getting pretty close. Closer than I felt comfortable with being. Then I heard another scream. It sounded like it was right beyond the front line of the trees, almost like if it stepped out of the shadows, it would be on the road. I tried to get the little boy to come with me, but he started screaming. Abandoning him, I sprinted back to my truck and fumbled trying to start it up. After it was running, I hightailed it out of that stretch of wood. I don't know if I was imagining it or not, but I could have sworn I had seen someone running on the tree line beside me. I pushed the pedal down until, all at once, the canopy above me opened and I looked to see that I had service back. I made a call to 911 right then. I didn't know if the kid was okay or if he needed help, but the cops could sort it out. I let that night play in my mind for a few days before following up with law enforcement. What they told me left me with more questions than answers, and I don't know if I want to even know. The lady told me that they never found a boy in the car. The car was there, but when they searched the vehicle, it belonged to a couple that was from Mississippi. They had since been combing the woods for them, but no couple or signs of a couple had been located. I still look online every now and then, but still nothing. I quit interstate trucking the following week. I stick to the daytime hours now. I had never really paid much attention when people said that they just had a feeling something was off with something or somewhere. I had always insisted these people were just making it up to be relevant. It's not unusual for me, seeing as I am the only skeptic in a family of believers. Yet one night, almost 3 years ago, that changed for me. 3 years ago, I had been traveling for a company I was working for. I had been in Texas for a company conference, and I was making my way back home to Louisiana. Things had been going okay for most of the drive. Traffic was at a minimal, and so far, there were no wrecks causing delays. My phone rang at 8 p.m. I answered it when I realized it was my daughter calling to say goodnight. You see, I had told her I would be there when she woke up tomorrow. She was so excited to see me since I've been traveling, and it was mutual. Traveling is great sometimes, but I wanted to see my family again. When I hung up the phone, I felt myself yawn. I kept trying to ignore it, not wanting to admit that I was beginning to get sleepy. I refused to break a promise. I rolled down the windows and blared awful country music until I saw an exit with a rest stop. I figured I would pull off, use the restroom, and scope out the vending machines for a snack and either coffee or an energy drink to keep me going. It wouldn't throw me off schedule too bad. Veering the truck off the rest stop, my first assessment was that it looked really old and needed an upgrade. The streetlights out front were hit or miss, with more than a few not working. I had a little hesitancy at the back of my mind, but I just thought it was from being tired and not feeling that great. I parked and took a glance around at the parking lot, which, besides me, was barren. There wasn't a single car in the lot besides my truck. Still not concerned, I fished around for a few dollar bills and made my way inside. The inside wasn't much better, in all honesty. It was just as outdated as the outside. The walls were still paneled, and it even had that freezing chill that rest areas usually had. Not even the maps and coupon books had been restocked. The place felt abandoned, long forgotten. It struck me as weird that they still left the sign for this place up. Assuming that the door was unlocked, it must be in service, so I stopped by the restroom. Still not keen on being out in the open while I used the restroom, I took myself to a stall to relieve myself. As I zipped my jeans back up, the light shut off on me. I stopped moving for a solid 5 seconds and remained as silent as I could. Out of nowhere, the restroom door slammed shut. I called out from where I was, asking whoever was there to please cut the lights back on, except nothing happened. Zipping up fully, I eased out of the stall and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. I could feel my heart pounding out of my chest, and I was doing my best to stay calm, even if it wasn't working well. I took the corner slowly that led back into the lobby and was shocked when nothing was there either. Confused, I heard a scuffle behind the counter, and then the light switched. No sooner than I was in the light, it was gone. I was standing in the darkness, and the bathroom lights were now on. I felt trapped. By this point, I was too afraid to move. I knew that I was at a disadvantage, seeing as I had no form of protection. I didn't even have my phone on me to use as a light. I left everything in the truck. When I heard more noises coming from the bathroom that sounded louder and angrier, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was with me, or watching me more like it. I took off to the double doors and fought to get them open. It took a couple of frantic tries, but I managed to do it. I practically fell outside. Thankfully, I managed to right myself and unlock my truck before vaulting myself in and locking myself inside. From relative safety, I could tell that no other cars had shown up. It was still deserted. Cranking the truck back up, I turned the light in the cab off before I began to head out. As soon as I flicked the truck's headlights on, the entire building lit up like a Christmas tree. I nearly reversed into the guardrail when I saw a figure standing in front of the giant windows. The light shrouded the figure, so all I could see was an outline standing there. I could feel it watching me, and it was confirmed when this thing waved its hand slowly back and forth as I pulled away. After that encounter, I was no longer tired. I just wanted to go home. I floored it the entire way back, and I made sure to only stop at well-lit exits that I had been on prior. Even then, I only stopped once to fuel up. My daughter saw that something was off when I got home and even suggested I sleep with my light on if I was that shaken up. Imagine that, a 49-year-old man sleeping with his bathroom light on. Still, to this day, I prefer to stop at gas stations over rest areas. If you're the type to listen to the news, one thing you will soon learn is that if a trucker appears in a story, it's a safe bet that he's an angel or he's the monster. There is no middle ground with it. Since we travel all over, we see a ton of kooky things. We meet a lot of strange and unusual people. I used to make jokes that I always missed out on the fun stories, the wild ones with some of the other truckers would mention while at overnight truck stops. Then I had to eat my words in the fall of 1998. By that point, I had been working for our company for going on 3 years. It was my first job since graduating and even getting my CDL license. I was young and eager to see the world, being 27 and without a family yet. It felt like the perfect opportunity to escape the confines of Alabama. I knew my father was a trucker to an extent, but he had passed long before his thought even crossed my mind. It was pictures of him in the different states that even planted the seed inside me. Plus, I knew that if you drove 18-wheelers for a living, the pay wasn't that bad. We never went without, that was for sure. Now, after working my way up to crossing state lines and being gone for days at a time, I was used to this kind of work. I had my own routine down to science. I even made a few friends on the circuit that I saw frequently enough to know names and faces. In that line of work, everyone is transient. Not to mention, it's usually a rough and tumble type of crowd. I remember this one night, just because of how weird things seemed to play out. My previous stop had landed me in California, and now that I had finished that load, I had to make my way to Colorado. I decided to pace myself and take a quick stop to finish up some last-minute truck logs and maybe grab a quick bite to eat. Looking at the clock on the truck stop wall, it was nearly midnight. It was oddly quiet tonight, but I didn't think too much of it. Once I had my cup of coffee and a beef stick, I retired back to my cabin and began to flip through papers, using the overhead light as a guide. I don't really know why I looked up, but I did. From the other side of the lot, I saw a very nondescript man standing completely still, eyeballing my truck. I couldn't tell if he was staring through the windshield at me or if he had just zoned out. The lights illuminated him just enough to see that he was of average build, maybe in his late 30s. I hadn't seen him around before. Assuming it was a new guy or someone who just started long-distance travel, I left it alone. I tried to ignore him, but I could feel him watching me. It was giving me the creeps. I was still staring out of the lifted cab when violent knocks started on my passenger side. I was a bit confused because not many people would knock on that side, seeing as usually only the driver's side was occupied. I didn't move at first, listening to see if I had imagined it, but sure enough, it happened again. Assuming it was a pal or something, I hopped out and made my way around the front hood, and when I looked up, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. In front of me stood a petite, brunette lady. She didn't look a day over 20. That wasn't what shocked me, though. What shocked me was that she was only wearing a thin white tank top and white cotton underwear. Her feet were bare, hair was a mess, and she had makeup and God only knows what else everywhere on her person. Most noticeable was the rust-red stains that marked her arms and stained her clothing. She made herself seem small. Her next words were even smaller. "He's going to kill me. Please help me." She wasn't screaming. She wasn't running away from the side of my truck. She was trying to stay out of sight as much as possible. I couldn't think of the proper things to say, so I told her she needed to stay in my truck, but I would go find someone inside to help us. Her reaction flipped. I had to immediately beg that plan and assured her I wouldn't leave and wouldn't go get anyone else from here. I peppered her with questions on what she wanted me to do, and the only thing she was repeating was, "Please just drive." I offered to call the police, but she was adamant that she wanted to go away from the truck stop entirely. Sighing, I relented and agreed. I turned and peeked around the corner to see if anyone else was still there, but even the weird man was gone. I could see him looking around inside the store through the windows, but no longer outside. I quickly ushered her around and into the truck, shielding her from anyone else's view. Once she was seated, I could see her teeth chattering. Her whole body was shaking. I dug around in the back and pulled out a giant jacket that I kept stored in here for use in the winter and quickly draped it over her. She simply nodded and snatched a hat from that floorboard that she had slid on. The entire drive, she didn't speak. She wouldn't even make eye contact. I didn't want to spook her, so I just kept driving until I ended up in the next town and got her to a sheriff's office. You could tell she was still hesitant. I walked her inside and asked for a female officer, which one was able to come speak to me. I told her what happened and how I got involved, and then let her speak to this strange woman. I waited for what seemed like ages until the officer came back to tell me that she was taking her to the hospital and I was free to go. I would be lying if I said that I didn't want to stay and make sure she was safe, yet I understood that I had done my part. I eventually left and finished the rest of my routes without any other surprises. Of course, I tried to follow up with the law enforcement agency to see if she was okay, but they kept stonewalling me. I figured it was just confidential and let it go. It wasn't until a few weeks later, after I was home, that it all made sense. I was at the house with some buddies just grilling out. They were also truckers, so I told them the story. My best friend yelled at me from inside of the house, telling me I had to see this. So I grabbed my beer and walked up to him in the living room. Lo and behold, the stranger I had picked up that night was on the screen. I turned the volume up when I saw another face flash across, the weird man that was watching my truck. From what the newscaster was saying, she had been held hostage after hitchhiking, and she escaped when he stopped to go get food at the station. She had been missing for almost 4 days. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that after her escape, they found him. They also gained a confession about 4 other women that didn't escape. I don't know why he was staring me down even now. However, I do hope that the little lady I picked up is living a safe and happy life now with him on death row.